I was contemplating what to speak about today. I had an idea in my mind that it's the Parsha Baloischa, and we often speak about light and lighting lamps. And then I thought, something that's been troubling me is, for want of a better way of summarizing it, the Black Lives Matter movement and the issues around it. Well, I'll start as always with a joke, although it's a serious matter, obviously. But it puts things in context, and then you'll see hopefully what my point is. And hopefully it's something we can all get behind, not because of specific movements or particular organizations, which always comes with challenges, often where organizations may unfortunately have their own prejudice sometimes. So you may know the story of the American tourist who comes to Moscow just after Glasnost, and he's talking to a local, and they're saying, it was so hard, people would come in the middle of the night into your home and harass you and question you, and you could be taken away in the middle of the night, and you never quite knew what was going on, and it was very scary times. And the American tourist says to the Russian, why didn't you just call the police? We as a people know what it's like to have mistrust of authorities. We have a family WhatsApp group. Some of my family in America were saying, it's terrible, the riots are going on, and why are people behaving in this way? And I did put at one point, and not everyone agreed with me, that my first thought was, we don't understand what it's like to be driving in your car and be pulled over by the police simply because of your skin color. They don't believe you can be driving a car like that. And to be constantly the target of suspicion. And then I said, actually, we do. Because you go back 70, 80 years, and our greatest fear as a people was somebody in a uniform. There is a story, I don't think it was CST, I think it was the precursor to CST, I don't know what the name of the organization was. Alan Levy told me once, who works for CST, some of you may know, I think he's from around here, from Hackney originally. Alan, dear friend, told me that in the 1950s there'd been a murder in Stamford Hill, and the police were going door to door, making inquiries. And although it was nothing to do with the Jewish community, but they were knocking on doors, and they were having doors slammed in their faces. And they came to the precursor, whatever it was, to the CST, a community organization there, and they said, we don't understand what's going on. And they said to them, try going in plain clothes. And when they knocked on doors without the uniforms, people were much more welcoming. It's hard to imagine a time, because of course people had come through the Shoah, many had fled from Europe to this country, and the sight of a person in uniform didn't fill them with confidence, it filled them with dread. Maybe we can understand what it's like for African Americans, or for that matter, for the BAME community in this country, to not feel safe, to have to raise your children that if you see a policeman, there's a chance he may hurt you and you have to run away as quickly as you can. I know there are all kinds of issues which people are going to throw at me. There are issues with social issues and communal issues and getting our house in order, and each community has to get its own house in order, and there's crime and there's antisocial behavior. But when you strip all that away, it certainly should concern us, because we know what it's like to not be able to trust the authorities to look after you, to have that fear. We know what it's like because we've been through it ourselves. We've been through it in biblical times, we've been through it in the Shoah, and listen, it's not so long ago we were saying what would happen if Jeremy Corbyn came to power. Would the Jewish community feel safe in this country? So we do know what it's like. I'm not saying that we should all go and march with Black Lives Matter. There are all kinds of issues with that, not least perhaps their attitude sometimes. And again, it's not one organization, there are different chapters. And in some places it's like the Women's March in America, which at one point became quite anti-Israel. It's got nothing to do with the subject. And it makes it very hard to align yourself with organizations when there's always this question, actually, do they like us? What is their approach to Israel, to BDS, to the Jewish community? But on a personal level, on an ideological level, it should trouble us. Look, I also don't think it's the smartest thing right now with COVID-19 to go out and protest about anything. But I understand people feel very strongly. 2 years ago, even a year ago, people felt so strongly about Brexit. Now it's forgotten. Could be for some people, COVID-19 is forgotten with institutionalized racism and protests that are going on. I don't know. I'm not saying we should do that. But I am saying it's something that should really hit us in the gut. It should be very gut-wrenching to think that we live in a world where people, because of their ethnicity and for no other reason, can be afraid of the authorities and can be persecuted. and subject to racism. And it definitely happens. And we don't see it because, thank God, we don't experience it. When I was a student, there was a big push at the time, like in many campuses, to get a lot of JSOC members and Jewish students involved in student politics. And I remember being in the Guild Council, and I lived in Hillel House. I went to JSOC. I lived in a kind of middle-class Jewish bubble to a large extent. And it was just after a professor, I think at the University of Edinburgh, had made some outrageous comments about certain people with certain racial characteristics having lower intelligence and there being a scientific basis for this. And he was shouted down as a racist and a bigot. And he'd say, well, it's academic freedom, to publish these things. And I remember a debate about academic freedom. And a chap who, I remember him, he looked like Boris Johnson actually. He had long white floppy hair, blue eyes, very, BBC English, stood up and said, well, it's all about academic freedom, it's very simple. It's, you have the right to say whatever you want. And I looked at him and I said, excuse me. I said, have you ever been the victim of prejudice? He said, no. I said, I thought not. I said, because you come from the majority. I said, so you don't really understand what it's like to be on the receiving end. It's easy for you to preach your tolerance. And in the end, I can't remember, the motion I think was defeated. But it's very easy for those of us who don't experience it to not understand. We as a people have experienced it. If not now, certainly in the not too distant past. We know what it's like to have no trust whatsoever in the authorities. And therefore we should understand other communities that are going through that. And it should bother us. And we should look at ways to support them in practical ways, not necessarily marching and protesting, but certainly find ways to show our support. It should trouble us. Otherwise, when we say never again and all these things, it lacks meaning. And I really feel that very strongly. I really do. It can be as simple as just being menschlich to our neighbours. How often, without realising it, are we prejudiced? How often do we make assumptions about people? How often do we jump to conclusions? Just being a mensch, just saying good morning to somebody and smiling at somebody because they're a human being without looking at their race or their creed or their colour is so precious. There's a wonderful story which I've told many times. I believe it's true. I heard it from someone that was there. There are a group of shochtim, some places have full-time kosher meat plants, but other places not economical. So shochtim people who shecht, who slaughter kosher meat, tend to live in religious communities. So if you have somewhere like, for example, Argentina or Poland, shechita takes place, they don't necessarily have full-time, year-round religious communities. People will fly out there, or they used to anyway, for a month or two and do a whole load of shechita and go home. So in Argentina, although there is a large Jewish community, also I know somebody who used to fly regularly for long periods of time to do shechita. And they go to this plant, I know exactly where it was, I'm guessing somewhere central. A group of them, these shochtim, religious Jews, all looking the same, no doubt, with their hats and their beards and their black coats and what have you. And one day, they were in the middle of their, their few weeks of time there. Comes the end of the day, and they're all leaving the plant. And as they're leaving, the security guard says to them, one of you is missing. And they all think, no, we're all here. He says, no, I promise you, somebody is missing. Anyway, finally they listen, they go back into the plant, they have a look around, and they find one chap who got locked in the freezer. And this is a big industrial freezer where if you get locked in there for long, I imagine, you'd come to quite a sticky end. And they rescue him and he's okay. And afterwards they got to the guard and they say, surely we all look the same, with our hats and our beards. And how on earth could you possibly know there was one chap missing? And the guard says, because he's the only person who used to say good morning and good evening to me. Sad on the one hand, on the other hand, it could save your life. It's being civil to people, being a mensch, being a good neighbour, not just to our own community, but to the wider community as well. Understanding those struggles. I don't have an answer how we relate, how we do something about it, but it pains me. It pains me to see there are people who do not feel they can trust the institutions, whether it's in this country or the States. It really does pain me, and it is of concern. It is a Jewish value to have law and order. It is a Jewish value to have systems of justice that are fair and equitable. And if that's not the case, it's something that should pain us, and we should cry out. And quite a few of my colleagues did tweet about this and share things about this, including Rabbi Liss, chair of the Rabbinical Council in our synagogue. So, while we're sitting at home in lockdown, whatever we can or can't do about this, it really should bother us that the world is still very much an unequal place. And what we went through 70, 80 years ago, there are still people going through that today. I really hope that we as a community can find some way to show our support and solidarity for other minority communities at this time. I think it's really important, as we would want them to show solidarity for us, and many of them did at the time of the elections when the chief rabbi spoke and other religious leaders came forward in his support. We have to do the same. And watch this space, because I'll be looking for ways that we can do that. And I have to say, in Redbridge, there's an excellent relationship between the different faiths and faith communities and faith leaders. So hopefully we can find some way to show our support to one another. Because ultimately we are all created in the image of God. We are all human, and basic respect for all is a Jewish value. I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbat. May we appreciate the freedoms that we have and really take to heart for those who still don't enjoy them. Take care and Shabbat Shalom.